And, I was in the midst of planning my son Brandon's 2-year-old birthday party when I heard those words, "You have breast cancer." And for me, that changed everything. The first thought was, I want my son to know who I was. He left me for a very good friend and neighbor whom I was helping with her divorce, giving her money, watching her 4 children. So then I had to rebrand my business, not just my life, not just picking up the pieces of heartbreak, but really of my business and my livelihood as well. It was probably, for me, my divorce was harder than my cancer.
Kim Becking, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Hey, John, excited to be here.
Well, it's fun to party with a fellow Missourian. So for the folks who somehow missed my long rambling introduction, if you were to introduce yourself to our audience, how would you do it?
I am a Missourian, fellow Missourian. We are the show me state. That's what we like to do. So I'm a recovering attorney, cancer thriver, mom to 3, blended family, caregiver, a researcher who focuses on resilience and really leaning into reframing change and redefining resilience so you can ignite unstoppable momentum no matter what.
So everything you said, if you look through my sheet of questions, I have about a 7-page sheet in front of me.
Yeah.
You hit about every bullet, and we're going to slowly walk through those bullets in this life story. And you said before I hit record, John, I want to make sure these people, our guests, our listeners, recognize that they have resilience within them. They have potential within them. Their best days are in front of them. And you wanted the focus to be on them, which I appreciate, but I want to focus it on you for a moment. So you live in Missouri. You grew up, I think, on a farm just north of Columbia.
Yeah, Hallsville, Missouri. Population, now it might be over 1,000.
Don't blink as you're driving
Yeah.
through the town.
Yeah.
What was your childhood like?
My childhood was like many in the 70s and 80s. I am showing my age, but it was all about going out on the farm, staying out until dark, coming home, being involved in lots of activities. 4-H. I don't know if any of your listeners know what 4-H is, but
Sure.
was very involved in 4-H and activities and community and family, a very large extended family as well, which is really, really important and really where I learned to prioritize what matters most.
As a kid, what did matter most?
Well, as a kid, beyond Girl Scouts and Thin Mint cookies, which I will admit I'm obsessed with Thin Mint cookies still to this day.
Well, let me
Friends,
let me just jump in. I mean, for
yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah,
it's Samoa's, and in the comments, leave your favorite Girl Scout cookie. But I'm a Samoa's man.
exactly. And I'm Thin Mints, but frozen all the way. So that's part of what has gotten me through the last 4 or 5 years. So giving yourself grace is important, and supporting young female entrepreneurs. So there we go. But for me, it's really about connection and about friends and about spending time together with others. That was my childhood. That was my focus. We didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't travel a lot. I grew up in a trailer, again, on a small town farm. And so the Missouri State Fair was our family vacation, and we showed our animals. I showed sheep,
Hmm.
and that was how I grew up.
You were told in high school that you were not college material. And not
Yeah,
only were you told that, you, in many ways, you saw it modeled all around you.
yeah.
Many of your friends did not go on to college, and I don't think anyone in your family had gone to college.
I loved school. And I knew there was this big world out there. My parents may not have gone to college, but they really instilled in me the power of education and the power of there's a big world out there and there are no limits. You can do whatever it is you believe you can do. So they instilled that in me. And so I was told by my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Farmer, that I was not college material. And I went home to my mom. I vividly remember that day, all those years ago. I went home to my mom, head down, dream crush to my mom. And my mom, all 4'8" of her, looked right at me and said, "Kim, you are always going to have those people and you get to decide." So I went to college. I went to law school. I sent Miss Farmer an invitation to my law school graduation. She didn't come and she's since retired. But the sad part of that story is I learned years later, I wasn't the only one she told that to. And others didn't have the belief in themselves, or they didn't have their mom or someone else in their family or their circle of support around them that believed in them enough. And their paths were very different. So, I always come back to that and remember that. And I share that with those audiences and those leaders I work with, because how we show up for ourselves in our own mind and how we show up for each other matters more than ever, and can change all of our lives.
When you went off to college, did you assume you'd come home and live next to mom and dad? Did you have a career path in your mind?
I knew I wanted to go to law school. So I went
Did
to
you?
law school, after college and lived in Kansas City for about 22 years. I knew probably coming back to Hallsville for the rest of my life was probably not in the cards for me. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to travel. I wanted to have those experiences and learn from others and grow from others and yet still go home a lot,
Right.
right? And give back and serve. And so now I kind of have the best of all worlds because I did relocate back to Columbia, which is about 12 miles from where I grew up, uh,
Right.
about 13 years ago. Aging parents, right? So that caregiving role. So it's been wonderful to be able to be home, be close to family, and yet still get to see the world and impact others and do what I was put on this earth to do.
You talked about Mrs. Farmer. Tell me about Dr. Alice Barty.
Ah, Alice Barty. So she was one of my professors in college. And I had a legal studies and business minor. And so she was one of my advisors. And she was so brilliant and really pushed me to see things differently, to think differently, to not only think outside the box, but sometimes throw that box away, and really gave me the courage to go to law school, to say, I can do this. She had that belief in me. And I say a lot of times that sometimes we have to borrow our belief from others
Right.
when we don't have that belief enough in ourselves. And that was a time in my life where, I was young, I was in my early 20s and maybe didn't have that belief because I didn't have anyone around me modeling that. I didn't know anyone that had ever been to law school or professional school ever. And so she gave me that belief and instilled that in me.
So not only did she give that to you, you are like this hard charging lady leaning forward into life, man. President of your sorority. I'm going to go through a couple accomplishments: student government, ambassador,
Yeah,
SOAR leader,
yeah, yeah.
top of the class. What was it as you're so young, you're 18, 19, 20. What was driving you back then?
Yeah, I think for me, it was knowing there was something bigger out there. And by bigger, I mean, how can I soak it up? How can I soak up every moment? How can I make the biggest impact I can make? Because, my parents both were strong servant leaders. They both volunteered. My mom is 4-H leader in our local community, the largest 4-H club in the state of Missouri for the last 40 years. My dad was a JC, he's a Shriner, he's given back. Like they have both given their entire lives to serve
Right.
others, even sometimes when they didn't have a lot to give. But they had love, right? They had compassion, they had time. And so for me, it was knowing how can I take that and then do that in an even bigger way, right?
Mm.
To make that impact. And so I think for me, it was knowing that. And I think for a lot of us who are those high achievers, right, it's that balance of we're always pushing ourselves. We're always
Right.
what's more, what's more? What else can I do? How can I get to the next level? And so I've learned over the years how to sustain that resilience and that drive so that I don't burn myself out.
Anyone who listens to a podcast like this is typically trying to get better in their own lives.
Yeah.
And as they pursue that next rung, it's easy to feel burnout and cynicism and just struggle with who they feel like they're not yet.
Yep.
And so I want to make sure we come back and really talk about that because it is a critical topic for anyone trying to achieve the next right thing. You went on and achieved a little bit in law school, top of the class, get a job at a big firm in Kansas City, but you don't stay there long. Most of us, when we jump onto the superhighway and it's going in the direction we thought our life should take us, man, to the top, we stay in that lane, at least for a while. You were there only for a couple years before you decided to exit. Talk about that.
Yeah, for me, it was a pivotal moment when I remember I was working on a big trial and I had one of the law partners say to me, it was late at night, and he said, Kim, if you want to make partner, get used to not having dinner with your family. And I think it was at that moment that I realized no amount of money or title or, being on the partner track could replace the time with my family.
Mm.
And I really came back to my core values, to my why, to how I show up, to what I believe. And that is then what gave me the courage to say, right, see ya. And not to mention, there were also partners at the time who were like, you can't wear your purple suit. You need to wear a navy suit. And I wanted to wear my purple suit. So there's also that. But I didn't like be put in that box.
Well, like your teacher taught you back in college, make a new box. And
Exactly.
so that's exactly what you did. You leave that one, you make a new one. You begin working within government, though.
Yeah.
Kind of a surprising jump. What was your work then?
My parents had always been very civic minded, involved in the community, and I had the opportunity to go work for the mayor in Kansas City, Missouri. So my role was director of community affairs, which meant I got to go and really learn and connect and grow and build community and work with all different diverse stakeholders and work on their issues, work on their challenges, also go to more chicken dinners than I ever care to go to again. But it was such an amazing time. And at the time too, Emmanuel Cleaver was the first Black mayor in Kansas City. And so
Right.
so we learned so much about community, about diversity, in a city at the time that was very racially divided. And so how do we bridge that? How do we bring everybody together? And so it was such a powerful experience. And now he's a congressman and he's moved on, and I didn't want to go to DC. So then I stayed and I worked for the city council on policy communications. I was able to use my law degree a little bit there. And then worked in city planning on urban revitalization, again, bringing
Right.
communities together. And then that's when I then said, at that time I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and kind of in government, either you become a lifer and you stay or you get out at some point. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to start my own company. So I started a public affairs and communications company, and then started doing a lot of advocacy work and speaking as well because of the breast cancer.
Whew, man, there's a lot going on there. Let's talk first about the work that he was striving to do as the first Black mayor of Kansas City. Go 240 miles out your door, and you'll hit a city called St. Louis if you go east. And I think the challenges Kansas City faced and faces are representative of the same challenges we face here in St. Louis. They're just ours are even more significant because we're a little bit bigger and a little bit more stuck in our ways. And that represents some of the challenges we face as a nation, as a global neighborhood. How do you begin drawing people together to think in new ways around old issues that keep us from becoming far better versions of ourselves individually and collectively? How do you begin doing that in Kansas City? And how do we begin doing it as a global marketplace?
Yeah. I think a part of it is we have to meet each other where we are. And we have to show up with empathy and kindness and assume positive intent, right? And so at the same time, stand up for what you believe in. And if you see injustice, right? I'm not saying don't speak up, because I do speak up. And this is not a political conversation at all. It's about humanity. It's about how do we show up for each other? How do we lead with love? How do we lead with empathy in this world where so many right now, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to, what leader, whether it's the CEO, C-suite, frontline worker, my neighbor, my kids, everybody is struggling right now. And we're in this negative cycle of judgment and blame. And, there's so much negativity. Sometimes I feel like we're all in an episode of Mean Girls. And so it's really, how do you start shifting that? How do you start showing up as the light and being the good and sitting down at the table and realizing we all have a lot more in common than we recognize, right?
Mm,
And we all want to feel valued and seen and heard and appreciated and, yes, loved. And so how can we lean into that? How can all of us lean into that and start there and literally break bread with each other? And I've done this even in my own family when we've had disagreements and we have very different beliefs, but we have to not make each other the enemy. We have
right.
to sit down at the table and find that common ground
Mm,
and not dismiss, right, the hate, not allow the hate, right? I always say be an upstander, not a bystander. I feel very strongly about that. But how do we change the conversation? And it starts with each of us, one conversation at a time.
mm. So this upstander is moving forward politically. You're married, you got a baby. Baby's about to turn 2. Life is good, man. Business is moving forward on top of the world. And then your life changes. You whispered it, but I'd like you to roar it out a little bit more clearly. You mentioned a diagnosis. What happened
Yeah.
at 30?
Yeah. So I had left the city actually, and I had my own public affairs and communications company and really, working on building collaboration across the city. And I felt a lump. I had been doing my monthly exams because of my good friend Patty, and she said, know your bodies. And I found a lump. I didn't have any family history. I went to the doctor and then learned I had breast cancer, a very aggressive form, stage 3, triple negative breast cancer. And, I was in the midst of planning my son Brandon's 2-year-old birthday party when I heard those words, you have breast cancer. And for me, that changed everything.
What? So I have never been diagnosed with cancer. Obviously, I've been through some pretty significant health scares and occasionally still face stuff, and my family faces stuff. But cancer has to this point not been one that I or my immediate family has faced. When you are 30 and you've got a 2-year-old in your right hand arm and a party to plan and life to live, and you hear it's cancer. What's that first moment like after hearing those words?
I think for me, the first thought was, I want my son to know who I was.
Hmm.
And so I immediately went and picked him up from daycare, right? And for me, that was the big thing. From there, right, it's those stages of grief and those stages of, it's the anger, it's the uncertainty, it's the fear, it's the disbelief, it's all of those things. And then it was digging deep. Okay, we've got this. What are we going to do? And for me at the time, becoming, young women were being dismissed by our doctors. We were being told, come back in 6 months, come back in a year.
Right.
Let's just watch that lump. Our mortality rates were a lot higher. There wasn't a lot of awareness. We didn't have social media like we have social media today, 22 years ago. And so I really became that advocate. Because of my role at the city, because I knew a lot of media, I became the poster child for young women and breast cancer and really started using that as an opportunity to
Right.
share with others, to know your health, men and women, to know your
Right.
health, know your bodies, go to the doctor when something's wrong, to be an advocate, to ask the questions, to take someone with you, to listen to what they're saying, to really be able to lean into your own self advocacy. And then as a part of that, that's when then there were 4 of us young women who also started meeting at Nordstrom's Cafe, kind of as our own support group because there weren't a lot of young women at the time. And so there were 4 of us. Patty was 24 and single, friend of mine from college, sorority sister. Jana was 27 and just getting married. Jennifer was 27 and 5 months pregnant. And I was 30 and had a 2-year-old. So kind of every phase of a young woman's life. And we really became that support for each other. And we would meet at Nordstrom's Cafe in Kansas City, a little retail therapy as well, of course. And out of that, decided to then write a book and help others at the time realize that no one is too young for breast cancer.
When you're 24, like Patty was, and 27 like your other two colleagues were, and you're 30, you kind of feel like you're older. Like you feel like, well, I'm already in my mid 20s, or God, I'm 30. It's really a big milestone. And here you are now, early 50s. You realize I was a child. I
Yeah.
was a baby. You find these 3 other girls. You begin living and struggling and fighting for life together. Talk first about Patty. She seems like a remarkable woman, 24 years of age.
Yeah. So Patty, like I said, Patty was, and I don't know if you all can see this, but Patty was here. And again, she was the reason I found my lump. She was a friend from college and said, girls, you got to know your bodies, right? Take care of yourself. If something doesn't feel right, go to the doctor. And I would say that to everyone.
Yeah.
Listen to your body, right? Be that own advocate for yourself. And Patty just had this spirit where nothing was off limits, right? Eat dessert first was always her motto. So anytime we would go to Nordy's, we would get chocolate mousse cake. She was also a very driven high achiever. She worked for Accenture. She was very, very driven and had big dreams and big goals. And she never let her cancer define her. She did then have a recurrence, and then she unfortunately passed away at the age of 29. But her legacy lives on, and I'll talk more about that in a moment and how her legacy lives on with an important message and card that she gave to me when I was diagnosed with my cancer. But she was a bright light. She's still up there causing trouble and reminding all of us that we got to make today count, right? There are no
Well, why
do-overs.
don't we go there next? You talked about the card. I think it's one of the more moving aspects of her story and yours and the one you share. You are allowed. These days it feels like we're allowed to do anything, but she kind of gave you a clear roadmap of this way or that way, your choice. So let's talk about the first part of that card. You are allowed.
Yeah. So when I was diagnosed, Patty gave me a simple two-sided handwritten note. And I still have the card to this day. And it was all about, Kim, you need to give yourself the grace and permission to feel whatever you need to feel. You've got to process your feelings, right? Leaning into our emotional intelligence and our emotional agility. And, feel your feelings without judgment and recognize and understand, where are you right now? What do you need in this moment? And so the "You Are Allowed" card, and if I can, John, we can also put in the show notes a link to this, so everybody could have a downloadable link to this.
I think we should. I downloaded one, and what I was hoping you would do, I'm glad you have it in front of you, is
Yeah,
would you read that and
yeah,
channel your inner Patty
yeah,
from
yeah,
this woman who
absolutely,
hand wrote this to you originally and read us the
absolutely.
front side of that card?
Absolutely. And as I read it, here's what I would say to all of you listening. I want you to close your eyes and I want you to think about right now in this moment. Where are you? Where are you and how are you feeling right now in this world of what I call so muchness? You are allowed to be sad, to feel helpless, to be tired, to feel anxious, to be frustrated, to be depressed, to be lonely, to be angry, to cry, to feel out of control, to feel overwhelmed, to feel scared, to grieve, to feel like no one can relate, to wish this never happened to you or to others, to feel behind, to wonder what if, to long for simple things and simple times, to wish for more. But on the flip side,
And before you flip it, I mean,
yes,
if it ended there, it's already like, amen. Like, bring it on. I am allowed to feel
right,
that way.
right.
Like, we need that reminder.
We do. Absolutely. Absolutely. And can I tell you, John, it's so interesting. So 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, before COVID, I would take this to audiences, but I would really decide, which leaders needed this, or maybe it's an all male group. And maybe, I would have CEOs say, we want you to come. We're dealing with a lot of change. We're dealing with uncertainty, but we don't want you to talk about feelings, right? Or emotions. Now, fast forward, those same CEOs are calling me. They're like, we need it. I need it. Our people need it. Everybody needs it right now in this moment. And so, right, I think it's all of us giving ourselves the permission to just pause and stop and breathe and feel what you need to feel.
Well, now flip that thing over and tell us what's on the other side
Yes.
of that
All right.
handwritten note.
Right. And the other side says, you are allowed to find the good, to be grateful, to be excited, to be happy, to feel loved, to be hopeful, to realize you are not alone, to find joy, to realize you are stronger than you thought, to laugh, to be surrounded by people who care, to find your grit, to be inspired, to give yourself grace, to be motivated, to find the opportunity, to do what you can, to learn to ask for help, to make a difference, to be you. Which side of the card are you on today? And I think for so many of us, right, we're on both sides of the card at the
That's
same
right. It's
time,
spinning.
right?
Right.
We are flipping back and forth, right? Our emotions are not mutually exclusive. And giving ourselves in this moment, in the world that we're in, at work, at home, in our everyday lives, in the challenges that we're facing, allowing yourself to lean in and feel what you need to feel and give yourself the grace and permission to do that. That's then what allows you to truly move forward. But first, you have to stop and feel the feelings from that perspective.
And if it's meaningful for you as an individual, and it should be, it also means it might be meaningful to your neighbor, to your spouse, to your child, to the people who look, act, vote, and worship just like you. And maybe more importantly, to the people who look, act, vote, and worship completely differently than you. Like
Yeah.
we're all on this journey, and meeting people in profound empathy at the well of their life is how ultimately we connect with them and build something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. And the other thing about this, so like I said, unfortunately, Patty passed away at the age of 29 years ago. but her legacy lives on. Think about this for just a moment. She wrote me a simple handwritten note that I now have passed out to almost 700,000 people, right? That ripple effect of one act of kindness. So, what is it that you can do today, right? To continue that ripple, like you said, John, to share it with others, to meet others where they are with empathy and compassion and vulnerability. And that also allows us to then build our own resilience and sustain it, right? Because connection and community is a key to that resilience.
So, dude, I mean, here you go through this. You lose your friend, which is agony. You endure stage 3 cancer, triple negative. You're going through all this stuff. You finally begin the healing process, medically speaking, and then life begins to fall apart relationally. So, what I love about stories of true mountain climbers, and I don't mean the ones with the gear on top of Everest. I mean the ones who've endured the mudslides of life and chose to get back up, move forward, and celebrate something bigger than themselves, is the fact that their stories are always there's just agony in them. It doesn't define them. It's not the end of them, but it's part of them. And it's certainly part of your story. Talk about that now, the relationship, your high school boyfriend.
Years after my cancer, life was going according to plan, right? My business was going well. I was really starting to go all in on my keynote speaking and my consulting and that aspect. And then my marriage fell apart. So we had been together 22 years, high school sweethearts since we were 15, together 22 years, married 16 years. And he left me for a very good friend and neighbor whom I was helping with her divorce, giving her money, watching her 4 children. So there were layers of betrayal. Her name was also Kim. So then she took my name. And John, you know this as a speaker
Wow.
and an author, what do we brand ourselves with? Our name. So then I had to rebrand my business, not just my life, not just picking up the pieces of heartbreak, but really of my business and my livelihood as well. And so I had to rebrand and I had to figure all of that out. And it was probably for me, my divorce was harder than my cancer.
Yeah.
And I think
Tell us why you say that.
I think because it was what's wrong with me,
Yeah.
right? I think for my cancer, I was able to come to terms with cancer does not discriminate, right? And lots of different people get cancer. And so, as Patty would always say, it's not about why me, it's about, well, why not me, right? And what am I going to do with this? With my cancer, I was able to reconcile that. With my divorce, I kept coming back to what's wrong with me. And then it was the added layer of mistrust from a good friend. And so it was also then the layers of trying to co-parent, which was not uh, easy. It was really more parallel parenting, not on my part. And I've been to therapy. Therapy's great, you all. So I encourage everybody to go to therapy. But it really took me to my knees,
Yeah.
and everything was falling apart. And so, because I was then also a single mom, so I'm the breadwinner, and I've got to figure out how am I still gonna make my business work, take care of my son, and I had also had to really learn who I was again.
Right.
Because I'd been with someone else since I was 15. I'd never lived by myself because in college I lived with friends and then I got married right after college. And so I had to really get in touch with myself again and rediscover who I was.
Well, and you're saying the word again, and as you said that the first time and then the second time, it's almost like it's not again. It's like, who was I the first time?
Right,
I, as a
right.
child, you don't have a clue who you really are.
No, no.
And
Am I?
then at 15, you're in love. Gosh, he's so handsome, and the dances are great, and the Friday nights under the lights, like everything is about mutuality. And now later on in life, as he steps off the stage and you step onto it all by yourself,
Yeah,
you had to figure out who am I actually, and what am I actually, and what really matters to me. And so, as you said, I hit my knees,
yeah.
this breaking point. What allowed you to rise back up?
Community, community and connection and right? Also allowing myself to feel what I needed to feel. Like there were days where it was okay that I stayed in bed all day. I needed to do that for myself. And then I got back up, right? I call it gritting up, not giving up. There was a point where I knew I had to get back up. And it came down to my family and my friends. and the support that I received. And that is truly a key to any challenge or any change that we're dealing with, right? Lifting each other. I take that back to my cancer too, because my last chemo, I couldn't get my medication under control. So I would always have nausea. I would always be throwing up, right? All of the things. And my last chemo, I actually didn't want to go to. And my friends like picked me up and said, "You're going." And so, right, it's that community. And it's the same thing with my divorce. I had an amazing girlfriend, Laura, who flew in from out of town. I had other friends that would come and support me. And again, I had never been alone, right? And here I am
Mhm.
alone. I'm a single mom trying to make a business work. I had to like figure all that out on my own. And it was the support. It was the support of community that
What did
allowed
you
me.
learn? So you're talking about community. That's this collective view of life, which is so critical. As you went to bed though by yourself, what did you learn? What was that outcome that you ultimately learned about yourself? This unique gift that you had buried or not fully seen for your lifetime. And now after this divorce, after this loss, you realize, gosh, it was there the entire time.
Yeah. That others don't define me and how I show up, and that others can't distinguish or can't extinguish my light, right? So for me, it was knowing I am whole without anyone else,
Mm.
right? I am whole. I am Kim, although my kids now make fun of me. They say, "You were Kim, George, Carlos, George, Becking," right? Now, because I went back to my maiden name after my divorce, and then I fell in love and remarried, all these things. So, but I am me, and I am whole without anybody else.
When people say, John, I want to become a speaker, I always make time for them. I always take the call, I always respond to the emails. They want a cup of coffee. I try to meet for
Yeah.
coffee, try to give them the roadmap that has been tried and true and would work. And I usually leave those meetings thinking, gosh, but it is so hard.
Yeah.
It is so difficult to get your name out there, build up the brand, learn the profession, do it humbly, not believe the bowl, like all the things that have to happen as you progress forward. And it takes years, if not decades. You're doing this while going through a divorce, while needing the income and trying to rebrand. There's a lot of complexity here. What kept you on that path rather than saying, you know what, law firm in KC, do you still have a spot for me, or
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
pivot back into any
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
profession? The one
Yeah.
you chose is a difficult one. What kept you pursuing it?
Yeah, for me, again, I think it's that drive to make that impact. Like as long as and I too, right? I love to get back. I'd love to help others speak, other speakers or people who want to be speakers, and even others who struggle with public speaking, because as we know, that is one of the biggest fears that people have. And my advice, is always focus on the impact, focus on what your leaders or your audience needs first. If you focus on that first, everything else will happen. Now, when I say everything else will happen, it means you have to do the work, right? For me, it is about consistent, intentional action, which is what allows you to build momentum. And so I was very strategic because I was a single mom, and then I remarried, widower with two kids and blending while mending. And now actually this year I have exciting news. My husband's coming to work with me. So business is good. But yet I'm right. All the pressure is still on me, and it's a lot. And for me, it was about doing the work and being strategic. So I still separately had my public affairs and communications company,
Okay.
and I was speaking 20 to 25 times a year for many years while I was investing in getting better on the platform and my stories and right the business side of my operations, right? Because speaking isn't just about being on the stage, as you know, it's about all the behind the scenes operations and our teams and everything that we're doing to make it all seem seamless for the client. And
Mm.
so for me, it was knowing when I then needed to let go of my other business so I could go all in full time with this business. And I did that at the end of 2018. So, right, it was a very strategic progression for me of doing the work consistently, investing, and then making the full time move for myself. And there's no right way, right? We know this. I mean, everybody has a different model. Everybody does things differently. There's no right way to do this business or life for that matter.
Right. Much of your work is about change. And who better to speak on it than you? I mean, hey, wake up. Here it comes again. So you've been living it for a long time. First question is why do we dread, most of us, change so much? Most of us come kicking and screaming into it. So why? And then secondly, give us some tools on how we can grab onto it with an open heart and open mind and embrace the gift that change can be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we are wired for negativity, right? Our brain, we have scientifically 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. How many of those are negative versus positive? You say, I get to do this, or I have to do this, or you're looking at what's going wrong, or you're looking at what's going right. And not only are we wired for negativity, we're wired for certainty. And we don't like uncertainty. And the reality is, the world, especially that we're in right now, change is continuing to come at a more rapid pace than we've ever seen before. In the old way of change, like if you think about even in your own life or even let's say an organization, right? They're going to go through this big change. They've got one change. They're going through their change management process and they roll it out. They have change champions. They then analyze, they assess what worked, what didn't work. How can we make this better next time, right? One change. Now, organizations and individuals are dealing with about a dozen different changes all at the same time. And you have to learn to adapt in real time and thrive in the gray. And so, as a part of that, it's really learning to lean into your emotions, right? And I have my unstoppable momentum framework, which walks people through this. But the first part of the framework is all about the stop. It's all about what do I need to feel in this moment so that I can then shift and grit up and turn those obstacles into opportunity, that fear into fuel, and that resistance into my resilience. So I can not only, right, accept the change or embrace the change, but be the driver of the change. And so much of it is about what are you holding on to and what do you need to let go of? Right. And I take everybody on this roller coaster right now, John, like put your hands out in front, like you're on this roller coaster, right? And you're thinking, right? And then you put your hands up, right? Which feels
Well,
better.
let me be clear. I don't. But I think I understand the analogy you're giving. But on a roller coaster, I am screaming, sad, and wondering why am I doing this thing
I
again?
know, I know. But right, can you change it? Yes or no?
Yes.
If the answer is no, let it go.
Right.
But here's the thing, and I call that resigning as general manager of the universe. But if the answer is yes, you have to decide, is it worth it? Is it in alignment with my values, my why, my purpose, my goals, where we're headed, right? Whether it's as an organization or me individually or my family. What
Right.
does that look like for you? And I think for so much of us, the fear is what holds us back. So how do we start flipping that script and really seeing change as that opportunity? What if it works out instead of looking at the worst case scenario? What if it
Tell
works?
me when you're working with whether it's a group or an individual or the person staring back at you in the mirror, when you say flip the script, it's easy words to say on a
Yep,
podcast or to write
yep,
down or to yell at your
yep.
kids as they're barking in the back next to the dog. It's so much more difficult when
Yep.
you are struggling in a relationship or the lack of one, when you're struggling with things happening politically or globally, or fires out west or storms down south to say, you know what? And now I choose to flip the script. How do you empower someone to grab onto that and not just say it, but to do it?
Starts here. It starts with that you are allowed card. It starts with feeling whatever it is you need to feel. And then understanding when you shift that, what is the next best step I can take to move forward? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have it all figured out. What is the tiniest step you can take to keep moving forward?
You've been doing this work for a long time, and we could talk about your cancer journey or your relationships or your business. But
Yeah.
instead, share a story of someone you've heard about, either you read about it or you were part of their change. You were part of them recognizing there's so many things I can't control, like weather, and there's so much that I ultimately can. And today I'll take this one step. And now I'm
Yeah.
going to take this step. Is there a story that comes to mind of someone who has actually recognized, I choose to flip the script?
Yeah. And and here's what I love about our work, John, is I have dozens and dozens of those stories, hundreds of those stories, right? Like of people who reach back out to me. Because my whole thing is, yes, I can come and be inspiring, engaging, interactive, all those things when we work together. And I want to leave you with the real tools so that when you leave, you can continue to build that momentum and recharge your resilience no matter what change or challenge you're facing. And about 6 months ago, I had a woman who actually sent me a text, and she sent me a picture of the You Are Loud card. And it actually had mascara stains all over it. And she said, Kim, they were going through a big organizational change at work, and it was multiple layers, and it was a long process. And I had worked with them the year before. And she said, Kim, your card has been on my desk for the last year, and I've used it, but today I really needed it. And she said, not only are we going through, right, the next phase of this transformation and this change, my son's sick, my mom is having health challenges, and I'm barely holding on. And I saw your card and I just wept. And it gave me the permission that I needed in that moment to just breathe and be human. And so that, right, like that inspires me, like that allow, right, like for me, that's what it's about. And here's my thing, right, like the great, like I want everybody to use this. I want everyone to have that grace, right, to feel what you need to feel, to understand in the moment what you need to do, to pause, to rest, to refuel, to recharge. And then I do want you to have the grit, right? But here's the important part: the grit without the grace is not sustainable long
Right.
term, right? And we're all tired of hearing the word resilient. Let's be honest, right? We're all resilient. We've all been resilient, especially the last few years. You know, you're one of the most resilient stories I've ever heard. But it's time we redefine resilience, because this world isn't going to slow down. The hard isn't going to stop coming, but we can't let the hard harden us. So how do we lean in to the grace so we then have the energy and the drive to be able to then find the grit to then focus forward on our growth and keep moving forward?
So you are blending and mending is a term I've heard you use in the past. This family, I think you have
Yeah,
three kids
yeah,
between, yes.
yeah,
You're raising them, you are building this business, and your parents are aging
yeah.
and struggling a little bit. You got a lot of responsibilities. What fills your cup to give you the grace, the energy, the grit to move forward well, um, and to not lose momentum as you go?
Yeah, I think for me, it's knowing myself well enough to know what I need in that moment and truly giving myself the grace and permission to do it. You know, I talk a lot about grit, but again, that grace, and I'll give you an example, right? Burnout's at an all-time high, stress is at an all-time high, loneliness is at an all-time high, you know, negativity, like all of these things that are coming at us in the state of the world. And like you had mentioned, you know, the wildfires in New Orleans and like all of these things, all of this heavy, not to mention all the stuff we all have going on. And I think for me, it's giving myself that grace to truly pause and understand what's in my own resilience toolkit and what do I need.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of research coming out about the power of the pause. And, you know, and I always ask this, how many of us have skipped lunch because we're working? How many of us have back to back to back tasks or things without taking a break? And the science is showing and the research is showing we all need breaks. And
Right.
so I build in breaks. I build in breaks during my day, my 5 to 15 minutes where I do things that recharge and refuel me. That helps sustain my resilience. That helps allow me, to your point, to build that momentum, to be more productive, to be, right, have that increased well-being, that lower stress. So I've learned to not, right, not apologize, let go of the guilt, give myself the time I need to recharge my resilience. And then also as a part of that, to truly be able to connect with what really recharges me, which is also other people, right? It's myself and doing things for myself, and it's that community that I
Mm.
need. And that's what sustained me, especially being in the sandwich, as I say, right, with kids, although we're now empty nesters officially. So that's a new experience.
I thought you had a little glow about your face today. So now I know what it is.
Yeah,
Freedom.
there's hope. There's hope. No, but
You
it's
and Mel Gibson, baby, freedom. So, hey, Kim, we
uh,
have 7 questions that tether all of our guests together. And before I
yeah,
get there, where can folks learn more about the work you're doing?
yeah, absolutely. You can go to kimbecking.com. You can also follow me on all of social media. So,
So they're called the Live Inspired Seven. 7 questions. Get ready to run the gauntlet. Here we go.
all right,
Kim,
let's go.
what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Most impactful book I have ever read. Oh my gosh, I'm a reader, so this is a hard one for me. A recent book that really hit me hard was Atlas from the Heart by Brene Brown. Oh, love it.
What's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little girl growing up a couple of miles north of Columbia you wish you modeled more so today? So, what positive characteristic did you possess as a little girl that you wish you tapped into a little bit more today?
More curiosity.
If your home caught fire and all living things and people are out and you have an opportunity of running back in and grabbing one item, what's that one thing you would run in and save?
That is a hard one. All of my photos are digitized, so that's a tip now. Because it would really be the photos for me. Memories.
Anything else? Anything that you realize, man, since the photos are digitized, I don't need to grab them, but this one thing on that one shelf, tucked away in that one closet, reminded me of that one person is something I need to grab.
No. Home is where the heart is.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Can it be two? my,
There's room.
my grandma and grandpa, Mamo and Papo.
Is that your mom or your dad's?
My mom's.
Why'd you choose those two?
Well, my dad, his parents, I never knew his
Yeah.
parents. So, I really think because there are so many things I wanted to ask, that when they passed away, I was, in my kind of 30s and didn't maybe have some of the wisdom that I have now. So
Right.
just things I would want to ask them.
What's the best advice those two, or your parents, or some teacher, or your husband, or a child, or anybody else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received is,
There's always going to be hard. It's what you do with the hard. And as a part of that, it's leaning on family and friends and those around you.
as the president of your sorority, student council, top of the class, and a million other things you were doing at age 20, what advice, if you could go back in time, would you whisper her way?
Have more fun, which is also one of my core values now.
It's one we ought to all grab onto. Turn off Fox, or
Exactly.
if I offended half of you, let me offend everybody, or CNN and
Right.
MSNBC. Turn it off for a minute and have a little bit of fun for a minute. Uh, Kim, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like your one sentence to read?
My one sentence. She loved hard.
Hmm. Kim Becking, we appreciate you loving hard and inspiring the rest of us, not only what it looks like to be resilient, but the freedom that comes with it. You've got an incredible life story, and I'm grateful that you shared part of it with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
My friends, that is Kim Becking. My name is John O'Leary, and today is our day. What a gift it is. Don't blink and live inspired.